Okay, there we go. Okay, apologies for that. All right, and we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Commando Blog Podcast. My name is Don, and I'm your host, and I'm joined here by my TKB co host, Lily. We've got our guest
Hi,
tonight.
I'm Lily.
Oh, there you go. We've got our guest tonight from Slaw Report here tonight to tell us about what he does and discuss his travels and his findings in small arms. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, Don. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our work and what we do at Slaw Report on a number of different levels. Um, Thank you. And where do you want me to start?
Absolutely. So I guess the appropriate thing, of course, would be first to ask, what is Slaw Report, and when did you start? How did you start? When did this come about?
So, Slaw Report, well, first of all, the word Slaw, spelt the way we have it, Silah, is the Turkish spelling. It is a word found in Turkish, in Ottoman Turkish, in Arabic, in Farsi, in Pashto, a variant in Urdu and Pakistan as well, and it means weapon. And the point of the name and why we picked that name was because we're looking at the sort of the commonality of the word weapon throughout all these different countries and regions that we're looking at, specifically Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. And we're looking at small arms from a historical perspective, from a contemporary perspective, and we're really diving deep into sort of indigenous sources on these, and we're really trying to understand much more about these small arms from perspectives that really haven't been explored before in the small arms research community, specifically because of the lack of an access to language materials, to access into a number of these countries, to working with people in these countries as well. And we're really exploring that through working with people on the ground, going to places in these areas. And the way we came about, and I'm going to say we a lot here because it really has been a gigantic team effort. I cannot take credit for
For
almost any of it
sure.
actually. Yeah, um, but we've got a lot of folks working with us. But how we originally came about was I was going to university in Indiana after I'd just gotten out of the Marines, and I was really interested in Afghanistan and in the peoples and cultures of Afghanistan, and specifically Pashto, which is spoken in the south in Pakistan. And I was realizing there's this big gulf, there's this big divide between people who were studying small arms and people who were studying the regions, in that you had folks who were into the small arms aspect of things, and then they could point out, a VZ this or an AKM this or something like that in pictures or maybe in imports to the states and stuff like that. But when you got into some of the more murkier details of these small arms, and okay, like, well, why is this named like this? Okay, well, why was this popular and why that not popular and stuff like that. A lot of that was inaccessible and was hard to get to. Whereas on the flip side, you had a lot of people that I was working with, dealing with, reading from, researching, da da da. Academics, historians, religious experts, etc., who they understood a lot of the intricacies and the dynamics of the region, of the languages, of the cultures, of the political systems, of the different conflicts, which get extremely convoluted, mixing in like state governments and radical elements and then foreign interventions, and things start getting very hard to understand. So they understood that part, but reasonably well. But then they'd see something like, a VZ-58 in use in a conflict zone, and they'd say like, okay, this is just another AK variant, sitting around. And I'd be looking at that same picture and I'd say, hold on a second, no, that's a really interesting, actually Czech, model of what was the Czech response to the Kalashnikov and how to get there and why is
Hmm.
it important and stuff like that. So I saw this divide between the two sort of crowds, if you might say it, and I founded Slaw Report with my co-founder Haracha, who is now an editor at the Firearm Blog, and I founded it to try to open this divide and try to make sense of some of this stuff and really give a good academic and a good research focus on everything.
That's awesome. Honestly, I couldn't have said it any better. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I can totally imagine how convoluted and the inner workings of everything can uh, be like that. And previously, as we know, there are quite a few Twitter accounts that report on maybe something similar, but they're not on the ground seeing these things in person. They're not traveling necessarily. They might see an image online, and I'm sure you do
Okay,
some reports on
so
online stuff too.
actually, one thing that sort of occurred to me: did you have any sort of language experience while you were in the Marine?
Ah, yes, yeah. Tell us about that if you do.
So I had no formal education in Pashto, in which my deployments in the Marines were in Afghanistan, to Helmand Province. I had no formal education whatsoever. The Pashto that I picked up was when I was at a small little patrol base, with First Battalion, Ninth Marines, and I took it upon myself. I was like, I really want to learn this language, and I really want to be able to talk to these people. Um, there were there were formal programs that Marines did go to. They're kind of worthless in my opinion in a lot of regards. So the stuff I picked up was simply from that.
Yeah, because most of my experiences with the people went through like the more formal programs, so was a bit curious about like other perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the point I was going to make before was just how close you get to the actual source material that you're reporting on, compared to a lot of other outlets out there. I think that's very interesting and unique, and is definitely worth mentioning in terms of what you do. Uh, and sorry, I might have dazed off there for a bit. I forgot the how long have you been running Salah Report exactly? I forget how many years now.
We are in about our second 2.5 years so far. We started in I think 2016. Yeah, 2000, like late, like early 2016, and it's been coming and going in waves and stuff. Pretty slow start in the beginning, but recently we've really started to ramp up in a lot of different ways.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, that's pretty funny because we started in early 2017, so I think it's about 2 years for us, 3 years for you, and we had a bit of a slow start as well at Commando Blog, but uh, slowly and surely, especially recently, 2019 has been a big year for us, and I imagine it's been big for you as well. Uh, and would you say that this year and last year you've done probably more so like building a team and getting out there and knowing exactly what you want to report on, exactly what you want to see at this point? Would you say you're situated, or you think there's still a ways to go that you can sort of develop what you want to do with your platform?
There's still definitely a long ways to go. But we've come leaps and bounds from the very beginning, and it's been a slow roll, working out, creating a network, working with people throughout the world. Ideally, what we really want is to be able to have networks and sources within every single country that we study. So the idea is that, in a sort of theoretical sense, if someone comes to us with a question about, okay, what's the deal with small arms in any given partner or region in, Turkmenistan, we can be able to point to someone there and be like, okay, hey man, like, where do we go for these historical sources? What do we do for, what's the current illegal trade going on right now? What's the latest thing that the Turkmeni army is working with today? that's the sort of end state that we would really like to have. We're not quite there yet, but we've developed it out very well. We have a lot of awesome people who sort of believe in our mission and then work with us along the way and are part of us. And then these are authors and contributors throughout our work.
That's really cool. Honestly, it's a little similar to the way we work, where we have authors and contributors around the world, uh, mostly in North America, of course, but definitely throughout the world. And they all have different talents, different viewpoints, and different things they could share towards what we do. And so I could definitely relate there. Speaking of which, are there any members of your team that you'd be allowed to name, or there maybe a pseudonym or some sort of like a shout out to them, like anybody who's been working with you recently?
Oh yeah, 100%, man. From from let me start with Haracha. He's in Armenia. Fantastic guy. He's the current editor right now. With me, we have from Israel. We have a guy named Yol who digs up some really cool stuff about early Israeli small arms history, such as we had a recent article about the Uzi trials and how the Uzi versus the K12. It was actually turned into a big ego pissing match between the designer of the K12 and then the Uzi. And then from Egypt, we have two awesome guys, a guy named Madam and then another guy named Marwan. Fantastic dudes. Looking at different aspects of Egyptian small arms history and contemporary stuff today. Uh, from from Pakistan, we have a guy named Abdullah who has his own site called Khyber Armory, and he is super cool because he's able to go directly into Pakistan and directly into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is where all the handmade stuff is made there, which is colloquially called the Khyber Pass stuff in the U.S. And in Europe, and he's able to go into these places. And he's actually a UK citizen, but he speaks Urdu and he's able to run in there and just look at stuff and everything. And we have a bunch of other guys as well. They come and go in bits and pieces and stuff, but that's sort of the main group that we have right there.
Definitely, that's fantastic. Honestly, I bet they're all really cool people. Unfortunately, we sort of just met and we've kind of found each other, of course, through a mutual friend. For those who are watching, so uh, I personally haven't been able to go through all of your stuff yet and exactly see everything. I have skimmed through some of it earlier today, and honestly, I'm so impressed. I can't wait to see more, of course, and to look back on what you and your team has done. But moving from there, uh, sort of a twist on the question from before about how you started Slow Report and when you started from that. And you did touch a little bit on it from the Marine Corps you mentioned. What were you doing before this? What were your humble beginnings, if I could put it that way?
Well, pretty much went to college, and throughout in college, I really started getting involved in small arms writing for a number of different outlets. Bigger in the beginning, I was writing a lot for Small Arms Review, eventually Small Arms Defense Journal, where I really owe everything I have in this industry essentially is to the firearm blog as well, where I still am a writer for TFB, and I make videos for TFB TV on YouTube, although not as many as before. But the TFB crew has really been my home base within the gun world, and the gun writing stuff was really it was always like a part time thing, but I kind of made it my full time thing. Over just saying like, okay, I'm gonna try to make this work and try to get more into it and that kind of deal, and that's kind of where I was at. Towards like as I went through college and as I got out of college, and I just continued with that.
Nice, very nice. Uh, so I did know some of that. I originally have seen you on TFB, and of course that's a very big media outlet online for small arms and as a blog. And it's interesting to see how people from TFB have come and gone and splintered and started their own things. And it's been a very good. I don't know how to put it exactly, but sort of a
Incubator.
home base, like you mentioned, for people.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're kind of like a group of pro-ams, like professional amateurs in that regard, in that like we do this gun writing thing to a very high standard, and there's a lot of people who've started in TFB have pushed on to other things. There's an author who pushed on and he makes his own stocks or something now. We have one author who pushed on and now works for HK. We had another author who pushed on and actually worked for Knights Armament for a while. A lot of guys get their beginning in that, and then they sort of like bounce from there, and then they might come back or they might not. But yeah, yeah,
I was just gonna say like an incubator, more like for
yeah,
the
yeah, 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 definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way of putting it, I suppose. For lack of better words, of course, but I totally get what you mean by that. Uh, from there, I did want to say uh, we actually got quite a few interested patrons of the Commando blog. Wanted to ask you some questions earlier, and those were the most of the talking points that I had pulled together from earlier. And the first one I wanted to ask from that was, what's the non-militant gun culture like over in the places that you visited, let's say the past year?
All right, so yeah, so looking over your points here, and to answer that question is, I mean, so this is kind of where we really get in the weeds in Slaw Report, is that like gun guys, like gun people, sort of find each other. And so we're able to connect with people in these other places in Iraq, in um, Saudi and Pakistan, um, in places like that. And it varies from place to place, and there's a different sort of culture depending on the different country it's in, and there's different values and like people like different things. um but for the most part, it's like it's the same. Like gun people are the same everywhere. It's like it's people who appreciate small arms. It's people who appreciate either history or they appreciate a well functioning firearm. It's not overt like it is in the states. A lot of these folks unfortunately have to like deal in the dark, so to speak, and they have to be like, oh man, like this is an awesome AK, but I'm gonna go to jail if I ever post something about this. So but the biggest thing I would say is that it's the same kind of thing we have in the states, with the same attraction that people have to small arms, but it's different from country to country in that they'll value things differently, or they'll think this is better or that's better, and then that will change, and then that will also ebb and flow with the supply demand of the small arms that they have available to them, um, that are able to come into those various countries or even made locally, for example. Are there any more questions you want to get more in depth on that?
Nice. Yeah, that it's funny. That was, in my opinion, a very difficult question to answer, and you did it very well. You summed it up very well, uh, with the way that the culture works, say from the states to other places in the world. There is that same attraction, like you said, among various peoples. It's very similar, like as similar as the very basic instincts of someone who lives in the U.S. Like, oh, I have to go to work, or there's this person that I love, or there's something I have to do here. This is my goal in life. Well, everyone kind of shares that point of view, no matter where you are. There's something like that. And when it comes to, let's say, an attraction to machinery or firearms in general, small arms, uh, I think everyone in the world can sort of. There's some tucked away people at every part of different countries that have that same attraction to small arms. Maybe in some places more than others because it's readily available. Like you said, uh, in some places of the world, owning an AK is illegal. In other places of the world, it's totally fine. It may be even completely unregulated. But there are regulations out there, and it does, of course, hamper some people from getting into the culture. Even me, I'm from New York. I currently live in New York still. I have to abide by New York laws, and getting out to a range can be very difficult sometimes because where I live specifically in the state, there are very few public ranges, and you really have to know people and talk to people in this underground sort of culture, uh, this sort of underground area of New York where people are into firearms, but they can't really talk about it as easily as someone who might live in somewhere in the Midwest or the South. Uh, and you have to really learn things for yourself and find out how you can get into something, get into gun clubs, find good ranges, find good groups of people, where to buy things that aren't overpriced. It goes into tons of different avenues like that, and I imagine it's like that elsewhere, especially where you've traveled.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I mean, in some cases, like you have to deal with what you got, right? So I was in Israel and I was talking to, a couple other gun guys there. And, one guy was like, yo, can you bring me back bayonets, like AK bayonets? Because it's like, I can't collect anything else, but I can collect bayonets. And by God, if I can do
Yeah,
that, then I will. If I can have some component of the firearm, at least I'll have a bayonet, so you have stuff like that going on, you know.
precisely. I've seen that for sure. Just one off the top of my head that I could think of is in the UK. There are tons of people who might be into militaria or firearms or something related to firearms in general. It could be airsoft, and maybe airsoft is all they have that they can really get into when it comes to maybe the more uh, modern or tactical side of things, rather than okay, go to the range to shoot skeet or uh, something very traditional or whatever. Or maybe they're just into collecting military patches or collecting deactivated replicas. So these things are all throughout the world different ways for people to get into a similar hobby, but in a different way. Not everyone can live in the 30 something or 40 something odd states in the US that allow you to own, say, a suppressor or a machine gun uh, legally, or maybe they're restricted by funds. There's tons of different factors to come from there.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and sometimes it's funny to kind of see the opposite as often as a lot of Iraqi like collectors will often tell me it's like it may be hard for us to get guns here, but at least we can get the full auto switch, and you guys in the states
Ah,
can't.
very
Like
true.
as easy as we can. Like ha ha ha, and I'm like, yeah, you got a point, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for
Oh,
I've heard that
sure.
about Pakistan. But yes, Lily?
yeah, I was talking about like on that topic, like the SGG-44s popping up in Syria too.
Those are really fascinating, and I know some of the backstory behind them. If you guys are interested in that.
Of
Absolutely. Let's
course.
segue into that.
So let's see if I can get some pictures of them online. But the backstory, well, first of all, STG 44s in the Middle East is not a rare thing. I was recently at the El Alamein Museum in Egypt, and there's an STG 44 on display, and we're looking at some of like how the 44 get to Egypt. And interestingly, we know for a fact the Egyptian army had 44s as early as the early 1970s, and we know this because we found an Egyptian cinema production of depicting the Six Day War, in which the Egyptian soldiers are all carrying STG 44s in the movie. And you see, this is where some of the local context is extremely important in these cases, because you have to realize the Egyptian, because this is a state that is controls everything as much as possible, and so the cinema included. So when the cinema is doing anything that promotes the military actually funds and actually like helps out the cinema with whatever they want. So whatever guns were in use by that movie production team were actually came from Egyptian army arsenals, that they were like, yeah, you want to make a movie promoting us? Yeah, here's all our arsenals. So take whatever you want. So we know for a fact STG 44s were in Egypt as early as the 1970s. The ones in Syria, though, the interesting point about that is there's a Syrian businessman who had them for a while. He was related to the regime in some part of another, and he had them in like this Connex box, in northwestern Syria,
Right.
um, for a while, like 90s, 2000s, and he'd often try to sell them to the states, to American dealers in the states, and say like, hey, I see this SCG 44 going like, I don't know, like $30,000 on like Rock Island auction. Like, yeah, I can sell you 1,000 of them at like 10 grand a piece. And the American dealers were like, sorry, buddy, we can't buy them at 10 grand a piece because we're just going to have to cut them into parts kits. And he didn't understand how the American market worked, so he never sold them. And so when the revolution happened, and you see all these SG-44s coming out, that was from that businessman's stockpile, which he like fled the country and like ran away, and then some of the rebels found his stockpile and then took him out. And the crazy part about it is that you find these pictures of like SCG-44s on like PlayStation remote control mounts, like in use by rebels in Syria, because there's barely any ammunition for them. Which, on a side note, as far east as northern Iraq, I actually found a 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kurtz round mixed in with a bunch of AK rounds at a local gun market here. So that was a really cool find, because it's like, oh, the stuff is making it further than you think.
That's incredible. I actually had
And
no idea about that.
yeah, and ammo is another thing a lot of people don't think about. Like one thing like you hear about a lot of times is like for the Khyber Pass guns about them using like ground up nitrocellulose film from cameras like as replacement for gunpowder. So like what's the reloading scene like say in Helmand province around like Kandahar?
Yeah, so Helmand and Kandahar don't make anything. Everything that's small arms related, that's brought in and either used by the Taliban or used by local forces, is brought in there. Nothing's actually produced in Helmand or Kandahar. Um, but in regards to the reloading scene and the ammunition scene, there is a lot of reloading in that guys are finding, gunsmiths are collecting shell casings, and they're buying shell casings, and then they're reloading them, and then they're actually annealing them, and then reloading the rounds there. Which, interestingly enough, we have an example of a so in the region they're known as a darai, because the small arms that are made in that part of Pakistan come from one big gun making village called Dara Adam Khel, which is in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And in Afghanistan, they're known as Darai, which is a shortened, like, okay, these are Darai guns. They're from the village of Dara. And so we have an example of a Darai Makarov in Kabul with 9x18 rounds reloaded in Dara. The rounds themselves are actually from Russia previously. So we know that they're not making their own rounds there as well. But what we found out was we tested this Makarov with 9x18 rounds from Norinco, which actually the box still said made in the People's Republic of China at the time. It didn't say made in China. So we know the box is an old cardboard box from the 90s or 80s or something. But what we found was that the Dara Makarov was actually built around the reloaded Dara rounds. In that, if you were to load a 9x18 round in there, which is more or less to spec to the original Russian 9x18, it wouldn't eject correctly because the dimensions were off. The bullet dimensions were off. It was like either shoved in a little bit too much or a little bit too far. But with the Dari reloaded stuff, it worked perfectly fine. It could eject and it could cycle fine. But the Chinese stuff, it couldn't. So what that's telling us is that line of handmade Makarovs um, was built around the local rounds, and they had either didn't have access or they couldn't build them around the essentially two spec 9x18 stuff.
Whew. It's like really a case of how far does the rabbit hole go. That is amazing.
So at that point it's more of like a 9x18 Wildcat than an actual 9x18.
Essentially, it's just the dimensions were off. Like you couldn't. It was almost to the point of non-interchangeability at that point.
Right. Wow.
Actually that's another thing you hear about like Khyber Pass is you hear about a lot of fakes of popular like collectors guns, like primarily like at least the ones I've heard the most about are like Martini Henrys or Labelles, since a lot of the troops they can actually bring them back since they're antique.
Yeah. So this is so this is sort of the biggest conception slash misconception about these so-called fakes, and that it really goes into the language of what is a fake and what is not. And from a Western perspective, these are fakes, right? They're like, okay, like they're extremely well done fakes. They match these things very well. Da da da. If you did not know what you were looking for as a a gun collector here, you could easily get swindled by one of these so-called fakes. But so this is sort of, so in anthropology there's a term for this, which is like the emic and the etic perspective, right? Is that the emic perspective is like what's the local indigenous perspective on things, and then the etic perspective is like what are you looking at, what is the perspective on this from the outside, from an outsider looking in. And that's the etic perspective, is like, okay, this is a fake version of the real thing, and in the West, anything that's a fake, like a fake Gucci bag, is made to fool, right? Like the people who make these fake Gucci bags are making them because they are trying to sell them at, a little less than the market price for a real Gucci bag, and then they'll make out with a ton of money that way. But the thing is, with the Darai stuff, with the so-called Khyber Pass guns, the Emic perspective is actually completely different, in that everybody knows what they are in the region. This is why they have a term for it. They call them a Darai. If you want, and the thing is, it's like the deal is the actual supply and demand of the real stuff, of the real Martini Henrys, of the real Labels, that are in the region, is so small that those prices, they know what they are. They know that they're real, and they know that these other ones are not real, and they know these other ones are handmade, or at least made from parts of broken other ones, right? And they know that the Dari ones are not real, and they know that these other labels are real. They know that the distinction is clear. Nobody is trying to fool anybody in the region. But why they make these is because you can't afford a real label. You can't afford a real martini in the region. If you could afford it, then you'd buy the real one. But if you're of a lower economic class, you can't. So what you do is you get the next best thing. Is you get this thing that is almost the same as that thing, and then you work off of that. So it's an interesting conception when you think of the term of what is fake and what is not. And that to us, yeah, okay, this is a fake. Someone's trying to fool someone. But in the region, it's like, no, this isn't a fake. Everyone knows this is not the real thing, but that's not why people buy it. People are buying it for a lower price because they can't buy the real thing. If they could buy the real thing, then they would.
Okay. Thanks for shedding some light on that. Again, another thing I didn't really know, but I just had an inkling of course, based off a prior misconception, and of
I
course,
mean, yeah,
talking points that come up repeatedly.
yeah. I mean, my perspective, at least on those, is mainly like the collector's perspective over here, especially since I mainly collect a lot of French. And yeah, you hear about, well, labels. Somebody's like, "Oh, is that like an Afghani bring back label? That's probably a fake." Or
Exactly. And it's so some of that market is catering to that sort of collector. Whereas like for instance, all the gun makers know the cutoff date of 1898, in that the ATF cutoff date of pre 1898 stuff isn't considered a firearm, so they know that, and some of them actually like chisel like date marks on there that are pre 1898 and that sort of thing. But it's small. It's not as big. It's not as big in the region as we'd expect like a fake market to be in the U.S. is.
Right. Okay. All right. What else do we have here? Also, another question that was asked by a patron was and I guess this is sort of like a similar segue from like, okay, we were talking about what was fake and what isn't fake. Well, how about some of the gunsmiths out there, or the bubbas as we call them here in the U.S., the people who, in layman's terms, the gunsmiths that butcher or modify guns in like a distasteful or displeasing way to the populace of people here that find guns aesthetic, or should be a certain way, or a pure uh, version of that firearm, like something that would be there that maybe someone thought, oh, let me dress it up this way, or let me do something to this gun in this way because of what they have access to or where they're from. Is there any sort of thing like that there?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And this also definitely goes into sort of this emic versus etic perspective of like what's Bubba to us is not Bubba to them,
Right.
sort of thing. So I shared some pictures here of the first the first picture is out of the Middle East, I think in Syria, and then the second picture is out of Dara in Pakistan, and then the third picture is out of Yemen.
Sure. I'll
And
just
you
take a
consider
moment to
all
put
these
that on
Bubba,
screen.
right?
Yes. Probably
Yeah,
most
so you
likely.
consider
Yes.
yeah. So you'd consider all these sort of Bubba in the US firearms like lexicon sort of thing. Um, and to us, yeah, they there definitely are. These are disgusting. These are ugly. Like, why would anyone have anything to do with this? But locally, they're not considered that, and locally, actually kind of valued. The first, the AK with the RPK trunnion, and then the bottom G3 with the obnoxious suppressor looking thing.
And the feet.
Those, what's up?
And the feet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. The feet. Yeah. Yeah, the monster feet right there at the bottom. Um, but those short things cater to a lot of the Middle Eastern market, which really values really short collapsible firearms that can be either concealed or mostly really what they're useful is our status symbols. Um, but to them, that's not a Bubba thing. That's like, okay, this is a short piece that I can carry around with me and that people I can show off and people will know what I have. The middle one, which is this weird blend of sort of stoner and Kalashnikov ideologies, like just smashing together at 1,000 miles per hour. That is because people in the region are liking sort of the aesthetic look of an M4 of a stoner, and they like some of the ambidextrous features of it, but they still want to keep some of the reliability of an AK. So they're kind of blending the two together, and it fits for some customers.
That's
To the
funny.
point, yeah, to the point where we're even seeing local Taliban. I think the Taliban had some videos or either local Taliban or ISIS Khorasan that had videos of that sort of what we would call a bubbled ARAK with the gun in the background while they're doing these propaganda videos, which is always 100% sure sign that they see this as like a symbol of power and that they want to project that through their propaganda videos. So it's like again, it goes back to like what's Bubba to us isn't necessarily Bubba to them in an idea, and it's kind of funny because when you get it's because I get a lot of people asking me like what the heck is going on with those stupid like pistol brace stocks in the US, like that is what Arabs think is Bubba, okay,
That's really
coming
funny.
from the Arab perspective. So and then that's silly because it's like, oh, now I have to explain short barreled rifle laws.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of expected it to be sort of a culture thing, of course. Well, of course it's a culture thing, but just it's funny to kind of hear it in that perspective. And of course, them being like, "Oh, well, uh, the workarounds or the things we've got due to our laws or our sort of perspective on what makes a firearm look good or more functional is different in application."
Exactly, yeah, 100%.
And of course, all the
Sorry, still
comments were joking about how there's feet in this picture. I don't know why they care so much, but yeah, yeah, there it is right there. All three guns are on screen.
still trying to figure out that middle one. Like are the Eternals more AK or more A? And they even have the forward assist on it. Like, never mind.
There's a
Yeah,
lot to unpack
so
here.
the internals are Kalashnikov based, but the externals, so to speak, are not because they want the reliability of the AK, but they want the ambidexterity of the AR. And if you notice, there's an AR T handle. There's a stoner T handle on top of the AK receiver.
I mean, it's neat, but at the same time, it's just still confusing.
Yeah, I would never buy one.
But it
Honestly, I
exists, so
probably
people
would.
will. People there will.
So I just linked an article that we have by one of our writers, Abdullah, where you can see some of the internals there. And this is what I mean about we're able to go into these places and really get the indigenous perspective by having someone actually go there and like field strip one of these and look what's under the hood. So
All right, so I shared that into the chat so they can see it too. That's really neat. Yeah, it definitely pays off to have people on the inside or the know that can go and see these things or share these things and have others check it out for themselves.
yeah, and
So yeah,
that's what was always pissing me off before, because before previously you've had these, like, people who knew a lot about the region and would go into the region, and they have access to this kind of stuff. And it didn't matter if you parachuted them directly into some of these gun markets, they still would have no clue what they're looking at. But the advantage that we have at Slaw Report is that the guys that we have on the ground who are able to go into these places are gun guys, and they know what to look for. They know what proper heat treatment is, and they know what a reliable firearm is, and they know the difference between all these designs, and they can look at this stuff and they can report back on it and say, look, this is what's actually happening, left, right, and center.
Precisely, it's a perfect representation of of that knowledge and being able to share it on the internet and vice versa, learning from the internet, putting it back on. Uh, and of course, I'm sure some of these people grew up with this before the internet, obviously, and just learned things on their own. They were around it either because they became interested in it or it might have been pushed onto them in a sort of way and it became a part of life. Uh, so many different ways that people just get involved with this sort of thing, and I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, we do too.
Absolutely. So we do have other questions here. Let's see. Uh, so the next thing here would be uh, what country outside of Central Asia and North Africa would you see smuggled arms in those regions most commonly originate from? If that makes sense.
I would say the answer to this is 100% China,
Oh, okay.
leading by Eastern Europe, and then might throw some Iran in there for some really good proliferation stories. But definitely, definitely China. You see more Chinese material all over the Middle East than probably anything else combined. Leading, of course, by Eastern European stuff. You see a lot of stuff, all the Cold War, all the Cold War Eastern Bloc countries. The old material, the Romanian stuff, the Albanian stuff, the Hungarians, all that weird stuff kind of gets mixed in there. Especially, and even some of the modern, you see a lot of arsenal material getting all over, which coincidentally, especially in the case of Syria, you have a lot of um, diverted proliferation from U.S. supply, which is SOCOM or CIA buying stuff up from Eastern Europe, labeling the United States as the end user, and then turning around and then shoving it right into Syria, which is an interesting dynamic. However, that plays out, but you see a lot of stuff going on there. The two examples that I shared in the chat are some interesting ones. Both of these pictures I took in Syria. The one on top is a Chinese, it's an NP something. I think it's an MP, might be an MP34, an MP20. I forget which series it is. But as you can tell, the serial numbers are scrubbed and all that stuff. But then on the bottom, we have an M80, which is a Chinese, essentially, it's like semi-covert production, where this is a purely export model of a PKM that China manufactures and then just exports throughout the world. Interestingly, with the M80, on a recent trip to the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia, we saw captured M80s from the early 2000s in Iraq, and we are still seeing M80s all over the place in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen. And
Okay, so I
the
do
thing,
have the images here. I'm put them on the
oh,
screen soon because people are asking for them. So I'll put them all up the same way. Go ahead.
yeah, and the hardest part about the Chinese material, which makes it doubly hard in terms of proper identification, is that China sold all their machining tools to Iran and Albania. So you have Iranian KL series Kalashnikov pattern rifles. There's the KLF, there's the KL, there's the KLS, which are different variants that Iran has, and then Albania has another couple of variants. But these are almost completely identical to the Chinese variants. The only way you can tell is if you were right up on them with a magnifying glass, and you could say like, okay, yeah, this is this and this is that.
Okay.
And yeah, so it makes identification doubly hard because just because you see, and I'll definitely say that out there for anybody who's listening, whenever you're looking at a picture from the Middle East, and you see either an insurgent or the SDF guy or whatever with a apparently Chinese, Type 56, there is like a 30 to 40% chance it's not Chinese and that it's either A, Albanian, or B, Iranian.
Okay, good to note. Huh. Oh, okay.
Oh,
So to sum that up, it would be China first, and then you said Eastern Europe, and then what was the third one? I think you mentioned a third source.
Iran.
Iran. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you see a lot of stuff from Iran around. Which real quick, if you look at the picture I just showed up, if for the majority of people who would look at that picture of the underfolder AKMS, a lot of people would say this might be a Chinese Type 56 variant. This is actually an Iranian KL. And the only way you can tell is to get up in the markings and see it.
Okay. Let me put that on screen and sort of just supersize that so people could take a look. I'm gonna impose it over the other images. Oh, that was big. Okay.
This is what I'm talking about in this most recent image I'm sharing. It's like this is one of the lot numbers to look for in an Iranian KL on the bottom part of the receiver, and you're not going to see that in the picture. You're going to have to zoom right up on it, and so that's one example.
Right. These are great photos. Did you take these photos, or was another member of Slaw Report on site to see this and take these?
Yes, yeah, I took all these, the last four that I shared.
Nice. And there we go. That's the underside there, next to the magwell.
Okay.
Yeah, that is hard to see.
The other thing I've kind of been wondering is what kind of aesthetic modifications do you see made to pre-existing arms? I mean, because I know like people talk about like packy tape and that kind of stuff. Then I personally have a Gras Muscatoon that's issued to colonial troops where they hammered a bunch of percussion caps into it. So yeah, what kind of like aesthetic modifications do they tend to prefer, especially like in the less thought about areas like North Africa, like that area of the Middle East?
I'll show you some aesthetics here in a second.
Get a premium look at those aesthetics.
Is that aesthetically gold enough for you?
Oh boy. I love the patch, by the way.
I don't know. It doesn't have Yeet. It doesn't have Yeet cannon engraved in the.
Yeah. So that's a Saudi presentation, P7, which I'm pretty sure this one was actually made by HK and it was just plated by HK for Saudi, or Saudi plated it, given to a DoD official earlier. But aesthetic modifications. So yeah, Packy tape is one of the funnier things that you mentioned, because it's like everyone like AK collectors are big on Packy tape in the United States, but it's like and you go to the region, it's like, what? You mean like the stuff you buy in hardware stores? Like that's like that's like the bee's knees for collectors in the States. Like, oh man, got a roll of Packy tape in yesterday. Um, but yeah, in the big thing with that in Afghanistan, especially with that tape, is it's used to sort of preserve the firearm. Um, and that's the big thing that you see in aesthetic wise, because well, first of all, there might be a misconception that like a lot of these places are just awash in guns, which is actually incorrect. There's actually the supply and demand. There's actually a very small supply. As an example, in Iraq, if you want to buy a used Glock 19 gun market, you're probably the lack of a supply, and that it's actually really low. So what you see is a lot of people preserving their guns. So as an example with that Packy tape, you'll see stocks and wood wrapped with it in an attempt to protect it, to prolong it, to keep it in a better condition. You see a weird version of that in use with the Kurds in the SDF in Syria, in that they actually take their uniform material and then they actually cut outlines of the guns in their uniforms, and then they wrap the guns in this cloth. So it looks actually ridiculous, because you'll have, even to the extent with M16 magazines, um, wrapped in this like multicam material, and there's the magazine is velcroed to the cloth that's on the gun, that's on the receiver. So if you were to try to drop the magazine, it wouldn't drop more than like an inch or two, because it's attached to to the cloth there. So, but that's another variant of that, and that you see attempts to sort of wrap guns in cloth to try to prolong them and keep their quality. Other variations of that you see it in the Gulf states and in Jordan. Previously, you saw a lot of wrapping of Martini Henrys and other bolt action, other older rifles, in that you'd see them wrapped in wire for a similar kind of thing to preserve it as well and protect the wood. And also, I think it would have a good gripping surface, better than the wood as it was if your hands got really sweaty, like in the sun. And then you've got like minor variations of this sort of modifying things aesthetically all over the place as well.
Okay, and so that's a typical preservation thing there. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I'll try to find an image of the SDF stuff, because some of it gets really out of hand.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Um, One of our viewers was asking. He noticed there's a few images where you're wearing a certain jacket. Is that a Arc'teryx jacket, or a Leaf Alpha? I don't know if
It is
that's.
in, it is indeed Arc'teryx, and that darn thing, the zipper completely ripped when I was
Oh,
in Syria, and I had to tape the zipper together. But shout out to Arc'teryx. I sent it to them, and they sent me a new one back.
that's pretty good. I totally believe it. I mean, you're paying that. It should be definitely covered. So that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Okay, so um, so you're sharing the. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong chat here. Okay. Just wasn't sure if you were sharing a new image there. I couldn't see it. Had to refresh.
I'm gonna pull one up in a second.
Sure. Oh yeah. In the meantime, a different viewer said Steve from IU says hi. I guess you know what that means.
Oh
Maybe no.
man, that's Steve Swingler. Yeah, yeah. I hope he's not working in insurance at this point. I hope he's gotten something in DC.
Well, that's good. You got a shout out there. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Steve's a great guy. Steve actually helped our Students for Concealed Carry organization at IU a
Oh,
while back.
wonderful.
So this recent image I'm sharing of a Kurdish YPJ. So this is a female fighter in Kurdish Defense Forces. This is exactly what I'm talking about with this trying to protect her M16 by wrapping it in this weird cloth material. And you can notice with the magazine, the magazine can't even drop free at this point. It's like this is to the point of ridiculous.
Oh wow. Yeah, I totally. That's pretty funny.
And the back of the buttstock is completely uncovered too.
Yeah, it's like what are you trying to do? I don't know. And you see, I've seen one. I have a picture of one somewhere of a an SDF fighter with an AK wrapped in the same stuff, and there's one slit in the entire wrap. It is a complete weapon wrap, and there's only one slit, and that's for the charging handle. And it's like, what? You can't even access the safety.
Yeah, that's really peculiar. What the heck?
Well, but it's like so like to and this is what I mean, this like sort of this emic versus etic thing again. It's like to us this is ridiculous. But from their perspective, it's like if an M16 is so expensive and you're only going to get one or you're only able to score one off of, some ISIS fighter that you killed or something, you're going to protect it and you're going to try to keep it, as pristine as it is because, if you get it scratched up and everything, you'll risk losing a lot out on it to the point where I asked around before if I was wondering because I see a big problem in especially in Iraq and Syria is holsters. Is that you'll often see either left-handed shooters with right-handed holsters or right-handed shooters with left-handed holsters and adapting this and adapting that and no one's holster ever fits anyone's gun. All this other stuff and there's all this leather and all this cheap plastic garbage and I once suggested, I was like, what if someone came about and, got a really good Kydex operation going on here? It'd be fantastic because you could make Kydex holsters out in the field with, car outlet plug-in small oven kind of thing. And you could just make them right there for guys. And the pushback I got from that was, yeah, but then you'd scratch up the gun completely. And it's like, well, yeah, you're going to scratch up the gun. Like, this isn't a safe queen. But to them, it's like, no, this is a safe queen. And the reverse of that is you often see, I've seen a lot of Kurds in the north with Glocks where they're wrapped in this like leather suede sock kind of thing. And they actually carry it like that, like inside the waist belt kind of thing. And they actually have it tucked in their pants in this like suede leather piece that it's like, dude, that offers no trigger safety. There's no retention. In fact, there's nothing keeping that inside your waistband apart from your belt. But guess what? Keeps your Glock pristine.
Yeah, definitely succeeds in doing that, among other things. That's funny. Wow. Yeah, there's tons of
Glock
different
sock.
ways. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Glock sock.
Yeah, you could call it that. It's in the rough outline of a Glock. Yeah, it's a Glock sock.
Huh. Yeah, in the middle of the conversation, I was thinking to myself when you were talking about kind of, oh man, that's a great business opportunity. You could do that, but then the funny part is that they just wouldn't buy it because of the predetermined sort of culture, the perspective of, oh no, I don't want that because it'll scratch the gun. Like, just little things like that can. Wow. Okay.
Exactly. I mean, this is what you get when you pay $1,500 to $2,000 for a Glock 19. It's like, you want me to put that in a Kydex holster? Are you kidding? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't think you'd find many people in the States like, putting a stainless, Colt Python or a polished stainless Colt Python in a Kydex holster either. It is their equivalent of like a Colt Python.
Right. It totally makes sense in that perspective. And I wouldn't have known that had you not explained that, or if I read it somewhere else, which I haven't. Again, another thing. Just a load of knowledge here. I love this. It's great. Um, so that is all for the patron related questions, although I'm sure there'll be more at the end of the stream in chat, probably as a closing. But would you say there's anything that you want to talk about? Anything that you had planned when we just, of course, this was very last minute again, but anything uh, that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover yet that you think is very important?
Um, so it's kind of like to me, as a as you know, being interested in cultures and working with them and being around them. It's like I think like in the states, you can fall into this sort of crowd of the people over there, and they're just this weird bunch, and they come harm us during 9/11 and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're actually like in and among them and listening to them, and hearing their stories and hearing their struggles and hearing their battles and stuff like that, and you become friends with a lot of them. Some of them die, and either Afghans or Iraqis or Syrians, and your heart goes out for them, kind of thing. So that's kind of where I'm in it uh, from a personal standpoint. Big kick that I always get is when I talk to people, when I talk to Arabs or Egyptians or Afghans about some of their small arms history, and like I bring some of this stuff to light. What I always like to see is, I see like eyes bulge out, and people say like, wow, like my country actually produced this, or we actually have this rich history of Martini Henry production in Kabul around the 1800s. And people appreciate it, and then people come out and they're like, wow, someone actually cares about the stuff that comes from my country, and I have something that I can be somewhat proud of in a way. And that doesn't come out in other facets as much at all.
That's really wonderful, actually. It's very well put um, about just being able to talk to people about that and things that they may not know about themselves or their own country or where they come from, maybe even their own city or town. You could tell them something to be proud about themselves, and something maybe even you could be proud about that they might tell you that you didn't know. Things like that, situations like that, really, really amaze me. I love that sort of thing. Just it's another wonderful thing about travel, sharing culture, learning, and sharing knowledge with others that could really honestly make their day. It can make their week or their year. Who knows? Uh, Tons of people out there that uh, can benefit by learning this sort of thing. And of course, people who sort of shield themselves from it, maybe they don't understand the importance. Uh, there's a lot of ways to look at it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, definitely drives us a lot of the time for sure. And similar aspect, like what I've learned like the hard way, sort of, in recent travels in Egypt, and Jordan, is that like this kind of the idea of like researching small arms is like a liberty that we have in the U.S. That's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like research M14s today. It's like, yeah, I'm
Right.
totally gonna get into it. It's like there's there's no it's very hard for like the US population, I think, as a collective, to like look down on that kind of thing and kind of meet it with suspicion, because like it's just accepted. It's like this is a historical fact, research it, boom. But when you go to some of these places, especially in the case of Egypt, which is a very strict, almost informally, currently a police state kind of thing, and especially when you get into small arms, like small arms aren't in the realm of like interesting history. Small arms are actually in the realm of like national security, because in the
Oh,
case of Egypt, in a lot of these cases, you have a lot of the states producing the small arms there, so it's a state production thing, and it's an instrument of the state, in which this is what arms the state's military. This is a component of the state's foreign policy, and that, okay, like this country is dealing with this other country, okay, how about we sweeten this deal and send you a bunch of our guns over here, or do this kind of thing. So it's not like interesting history in the overall portion. It's actually an issue of national security at this point. It's like this is like a component, and anything about this should be secret, and no one should know anything about it. So that's why that's another surprise look I get from a lot of people, and especially I got it in Egypt from a lot of Egyptians who were like, "What? Like you're looking at guns? Like that's like couldn't you be arrested for that kind of thing?" And unfortunately, for a lot of Egyptians, if they were to look into that enough, they could be arrested for it.
Oh,
I kind of have the I kind of have the advantage of being the oblivious foreigner, being able to leave or at least get kicked out at that point. So a lot of Egyptians actually don't have that liberty, unfortunately. Which goes into like again what I was saying earlier is that a lot of these folks are like, wow, like someone actually gives a crap about this. Like we were always taught growing up this was something you just never ask questions about.
for sure. Yeah, that's you know, another thing, especially us in the U.S. Most people don't know even the most basic nuances of political oversight in some of these nations. Egypt, you just mentioned, with just how much they crack down on a national security standpoint of firearms or small arms is like maybe to the same extent in other countries in the world, that maybe even Western countries that just hate guns in general, or they just look down on the fact of private ownership or private knowledge of firearms. And then you can go somewhere else in the same continent, and uh, you know there's tons to come, there's tons to go from, and there's tons of information out there, and there's a culture surrounding it. So that's another thing that I think is very interesting is especially you traveling there and seeing some of this stuff, and the general populace being like, wow, that's something that's allowed in other places. Is that something that's uh, not looked down upon? And uh, just another part of sharing culture and sharing differences of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable in certain societies. So that's a good point to make there.
Yeah, yeah, and then and it's a bit frustrating for me because on the other hand, like being being a young male from the U.S. who has at least a cursory grasp of the language of Farsi, of Pashto, of Arabic in a lot of these countries, the immediate suspicion is that you're a freaking spy. And it's something I always have to deal with, and I'm super cognizant of. In that wherever I'm going, especially like in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Syria, especially in those places where it's like everyone everyone is going to suspect you of being a spy. So every action you do is either going to confirm it or lessen it. You're never going to get away from the suspicion that you're a spy
Right.
kind of thing. So I made like so recently I just in light of this I made like a funny flow chart that I shared with some of the Slaw report guys. And it started with like, okay, you want to research guns in the Middle East? Okay. Can you travel? Yes. Can you speak some of the language? Yes. Okay, you're a fucking spy. Next.
That's great.
and and then it goes down to like other things, but it's like, oh, like so it's annoying. It's annoying to deal with. It's like, no, I'm not a spy. I just like to look at cool guns, man. Come on.
Oh, I
But
bet.
that but that's the thing in the US, we have that liberty where we can be like, yeah, I just want to look at cool guns and look at this stuff. Whereas overseas, it's like no one looks at cool guns here. You're looking at this because you're trying to like thwart our national security in some way, which is like, no, I'm not. Get off my back.
Yeah, I never thought about that actually. Come to think of it, just the way you hold yourself or uphold yourself in other countries as almost an ambassador of where you come from, especially if you're visiting a place where the majority of the people are there are ethnic to that country, rather than the U.S. Being a melting pot of cultures and races and different types of people. Foreigners can visit the U.S. and go to a gun range and shoot machine guns if they want to. Of course, you know, under certain conditions, in certain areas you can, of course, but for the most part, you can come to the U.S. and you can involve yourself in that culture with not a ton of suspicion of being a spy, even, but going to another country where that's not so much a thing. The way you conduct yourself is crucial, especially in such a what could be a very sensitive topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, so the main thing is you have to be careful not to glow too much, because
Yeah, yeah, that's a way of putting it, for sure. So we are coming up on about an hour and 10 minutes. So up to you, Miles. If you want to close this out in anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, let me know. We can even open this up to like a public forum from the comments, and they can ask us things.
yeah, I'm down for questions.
All right, sure thing. All right, so those of you in the comments, pop in there and ask questions for Miles from Silah Report, and possibly even Commando Blog if you have any questions for us or you want us to ask something specific, or maybe a question for both of us. Just pop in there and ask away. In the meantime, are there any final images you want to share? Any mini stories? Anything at all?
There's some really cool stuff coming out of Pakistan that I'll throw up here. Some interesting stuff that some of the, like, we're talking about the colloquial name Khyber Pass guns.
Sure.
Like, a lot of these gun makers have really advanced, like, past that sort of handmade, like, hammer and pintle stage sort of things, and some of the stuff that's coming out of Dara and KPK region these days is like, wow. If they brought this to the U.S., like, the U.S. market would have some competition. I'll throw some of that up.
Sure.
and I see they're even copying some of our memes too.
Yeah, yeah,
The
some.
Mandalorian skull.
Yeah, and it's funny to see, like, I think Larry Vickers recently showed one on there of, like, they'll throw all kinds of company names on there, like HK on an AKM kind of thing. But, like, the translucent Glocks, like, there's a Glock 18 variant derivative that some gun makers are coming with, like, copying the AKs, like at this point it's clearly advanced, like, past the stage of this, like, mud hut gun making stuff, where it's like this is like serialized production at this point.
Right. This is incredible. All right, I just put that up on screen. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I thought I saw this recently. I saw a YouTube video. It might have been you or someone else was sharing this exact sort of thing, and I had no idea it was a thing. So it's really cool to see these photos. Wow. Yeah, that would be super popular. I've been waiting for sort of an availability of translucent polymer frames for different guns for a while. I feel like it would be very popular. Of course, some people would be naysayers saying, "Oh, it looks ugly, or it's too much, or maybe it's a uh, for the fuds out there, but oh, it's a safety concern. It looks like airsoft or something." I don't know. I think it's really cool to see the internals.
Yeah, I think it would be great as a training tool. I think from what I generally have heard of is that, like, the translucent polymers don't last, are not as strong as non-translucent polymers, so that's why they're
Okay.
not really used that much. But as a training aid, I think they'd be fantastic. Like, if you could look into an M16 and, like, show, an introductory shooting student, like, look, this is what's actually happening inside there when the trigger and the hammer and the safety all work together. This is a weird trend that we're seeing these days. It's this big trend in especially the Levant and the Gulf countries to take blank firing pistols from Turkey and turn them into live firing handguns. By some of them, what you're looking at is they take old AK barrels and then they chop them and then they essentially ream them and stuff them inside some of these blank firing ones, and then they use them to shoot like either like 32 ACP stuff like 765 or 762 cartridges out of them, and they do something else with the 9mm variants. It's a weird trend to see because there's a lot of them, and you can see a lot of they're not the most reliable, and you can see a lot of videos on YouTube of them just blowing up in people's faces, but they're good for a magazine if that's all you need them for.
That's really funny. You know, it sort of ties directly back to a previous podcast that is available on this channel now that we're streaming from, is Deterrence Dispensed. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, Miles, but they're a 3D printing organization that tests a lot of firearms designs through CAD and through other means to print more advanced frames for handguns and carbines, rifles, and SMGs and whatnot.
Yeah, I was
And
listening to your
oh yeah,
podcasts earlier on it, and they were saying that a lot of the 3D designs out there are garbage, right?
yeah. So something that's sort of still up to debate, and you see a lot of this on Twitter, is people debating the usefulness or the longevity of some of these firearms or these 3D printed frames and parts. And I've come to the conclusion by talking to a lot of these experts and sort of doing my own tests, is it's a lot different now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago, this wasn't even really a thing, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, so much has changed in 3D printing and the availability of printers, certain types of filament and whatnot, that uh, now in 2019, I'm seeing that honestly, the 3D printed frames are holding up extremely well, to the point where most of the basic parts that aren't under a huge amount of stress are living up to hundreds, if not thousands, of rounds, and I'm just amazed by it. It's totally becoming viable.
Yeah, we're seeing, like what in your podcast that you mentioned, we're seeing what like 3D printed components that are making AR receivers, like airsoft blowers that are actually strong enough to work with the real gun.
Right, right. It's amazing. So we did get some questions pouring in. Some of them are, it's fine. You don't have to spend too long on them. You can give quick answers if you'd like. Um, don't necessarily need images or anything. But one of them was, what was the most abysmal Kyber Pass GAT you've ever seen? And that was his words there. So kind of Kyber Pass gun, if you've ever seen any that really made you go, whoa.
Man, there's a lot of really bad ones.
Oh, I
Like we
bet.
talk about a lot of we talk about a lot of the good ones here, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of really bad ones. Um,
Any that just come to mind.
I none none that really come to mind right now. I'd have to like really think like, wow, that one was really horrible. Um,
That's totally fine.
I don't,
It could be sort of
yeah,
an,
I
an
can,
after hours thing where maybe we'll direct our viewers to check out your Twitter, and maybe you'll post some later once you get that under you give it a good think, you know.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that
totally fine.
yeah.
That is a broad question. It is a good question, but that is tough. Another one was and you know, it's totally up to, you can give a joke answer if you want. But what are some Facebook and Telegram merchant groups like for uh, if you've been connected to any of these? Like, do they exist? Are they really popping out these uh, sort of like
Oh yeah,
sales or like
yeah.
interest
There's
groups?
yeah, so there's tons. So it's interesting. You've got like sale groups on Telegram, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, and occasionally on Twitter. even on YouTube in some cases. But
Really?
you've got them especially, yeah, you got for right now Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. There used to be a huge one in Libya, but a lot of that got shut down, and it actually differs per country. Whereas in whereas in Iraq, a lot of the Iraq and Yemen, a lot of the stuff is on Telegram. But in I mean no, in Iraq and Syria, a lot of the stuff is on Telegram. But in Yemen, a lot of it is on WhatsApp and Facebook. Um, and then more so in Iraq, there's a lot of stuff on Facebook. We used to monitor a lot of that. There's 3 Twitter accounts that do a fantastic job at monitoring them and are really embedded in them, so to speak. Caliber Obscura, Analyst Mick, and Armory Bazaar.
Ah,
They,
yes, yes. I have heard
yeah,
of a few
these
of those.
dudes yeah, these dudes are like the OSINT small arms guys. Like I'd love to monitor it as much as they do. It's like I don't have the time to sit in front of a computer like 10 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
because that's the kind of time you need to pick that stuff out.
Oh,
But
totally.
there's some really yeah, but there's some really hilarious post interchanges you'll see on there. I think one funny one that we posted was this Yemeni dealer um, trying to sell a Saudi G3, and this other Yemeni guy asked him like, "What kind of bullets does it eat?" And then like literally in Arabic, this is what it says: "What kind of bullets does it eat?" And then the dealer said, "It eats G3 bullets."
uh,
The G3 eats G3 bullets. The human eats human food. Well, of course it does. You know, it's like, man, you couldn't get any more specific on that one.
yeah, it's great to see that level of humor or unintentional humor from that sort of thing, and I feel like and fortunately and almost also unfortunately, whenever I see things like that from those groups, it's always because they leaked out due to a joke or a meme related to it, not just the general content of what was being posted originally, which I think is pretty funny. But that's the internet for you, honestly. That's great. Let's see, what else did we have here? I think that was all the questions actually. So I think we're probably going to close it up soon, unless you want to give any final statements or remarks, or uh, where can everyone find you? Any sort of like a Patreon or uh, some sort of donation set up or other social media you want to close out with?
Yes, we've got our website, which recently got remodeled. So if you want to, you know, trash talk our website in DMs all you want, please do because we can still change it. We have our website. We're active on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. We have a Patreon account as well. We've got all that stuff. And so you can follow us. You know, like us there. That'll be very much appreciated. The biggest thing that I would say is if you have questions about this stuff, or what I really like to hear is if your family or your grandfather or whatever, like has something from the Middle East or from Central Asia, in the States, and you don't know what it is or what does the writing say on it, like, send it to us. Like we love mysteries and we love looking at this kind of thing. Um, and more importantly, what we're really trying to build here is really like for everything from the region and going to the region. Um, you know, illicit small arms sales, military use, terrorist use, stuff like that, civilian use, all that stuff. We're really trying to build up a resource for all this, and and we want to try to have what we're working on right now is sort of a database where we're putting in notes and books and articles and just making it a central area. So it's like if you want to know about guns in Egypt, you should be able to come to us and look at our like database thing and say, okay, let's look at an early Hakim. Let's look at an experimental Hakim. Let's look at, a rifle grenade version of the Rashid, for example. Let's look at this. Let's look at that. Let's look at this training manual for that stuff. That's what we want to get up to. And we want to be able to do that and offer that for every country in the region and have like a transfers thing for that. Whereas if you want to have a question about guns in the region, like come to us and we should be able to answer it for you. As a result of the people who write for us, of the team that we have, of the collections that we have, of the research that we do, of the open source stuff that we do, of the guns that we collect in the States. Like, for example, I'm collecting, well, it's the Silah report reference collection. Is that, like, I'm buying stuff in the States, and the idea is, like, if you want to, like, research this, we'll be able to offer to a researcher, like, yeah, come to our location in the States and bring out a couple Hakims to look at. And you can, take pictures and look at that stuff. And that is a public service that we want to offer for researchers out there to be able to do that. And not only small arms, but also books and also cartridges and head stamps, and then the various things and accoutrements associated with small arms. So the various leather wares that are produced in Afghanistan and produced, worn by the Kurds and stuff like that. We want to be able to have examples of all of that on hand so people can see it and then, touch it and feel it, and then, like, spread the knowledge and spread the love, so to speak.
Absolutely. I really look forward to what you have coming, and that database especially would be an amazing resource. So I'm really excited about that if that goes through, among other things. And I'm sure you have many goals and objectives with the organization, and we'll be paying very close attention to it. And I'm sure the viewers will too. They love this. We had a lot of great engagement tonight. So thank you so much, Miles, for coming on.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Lily, as well. I had a really fun time. This was really discussing some of these weird niche topics that, isn't out there that much, and that's our mission. Is we want to try to get this stuff out there and, educate ourselves about it, because we don't know half the things that we want to know.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. That was Silah Report, everyone, on the Commando Blog podcast. And of course, that was as last minute as it was. I had a lot of fun too, and I think it was great. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more from us, the Commando Blog, you can follow our YouTube channel here, subscribe. We have other various social media. We'll link below in the video once it's been published, after it's not live anymore. And if you want to support us, we have a Patreon as well as Silah Report, if you want to go check them out. And yeah, check out our website at commandoblog.com. More things to come, and more collaboration. I'd love to see Silah Report back on the stream sometime in the future.
We would be honored to come back on the stream in the future. I'll definitely speak for the whole team on that one.
Awesome. I'm really glad. All right. Well, from all of us, good night, and thanks for watching.